This is First News 34, the 6 o'clock report with Bernard Fianti, Roy Sova, Paula Gorell with the weather, and Kurt Smutko on sports.
Good evening, I'm Randy Cook. Shock and disbelief grips the nation as the 25th Space Shuttle mission exploded just 1 minute after blastoff, killing all 7 crew members. Well, night has fallen over the Florida coast, and the search for what's left of the Space Shuttle Challenger has been called off until tomorrow morning. The largest piece of debris so far was only 2 feet wide and 5 to 10 feet long. Vic Ratner reports on today's tragedy.
Minus 3 hours in holding.
The day started with big smiles all around at breakfast from teacher Krista McAuliffe and the other 6 NASA crew members. Bitter cold had delayed the countdown, but as the crew arrived at Launch Pad 39, technicians presented Krista McAuliffe with an apple for the teacher to wish her good luck. More delays followed as NASA worried whether icicles hanging from the shuttle service structure would break off and damage the fragile heat shield tiles. But as temperatures rose above freezing, that threat diminished and the countdown continued smoothly.
4, 3, 2, 1, and liftoff. Liftoff of the 25th Space Shuttle mission, and it has cleared the tower.
Roger, roll, Challenger.
At first, the flight seemed flawless, but after 1 minute with all 5 engines firing when the shuttle was going over 1,000 miles an hour, there was a sudden explosion.
Challenger, go with throttle up.
Challenger, go with throttle up.
Only pieces of debris falling into the ocean remained of Challenger. Rescue forces were rushed to the ocean offshore, but found no trace of survivors. Vic Ratner, ABC News at the Kennedy Space Center.
President Reagan learned of the tragedy some 9 hours before he was scheduled to give his State of the Union speech, reacting in what one aide describes as stunned silence. Reagan postponed the address, but said the best way for the nation to honor the astronauts is to go forward with the space program. Sheila Cast has more on the reaction from Washington.
In the face of the shuttle tragedy, President Reagan postponed his upbeat State of the Union speech and instead publicly mourned what he called the 8 heroes of the Challenger crew.
We will never forget them, nor the last time we saw them this morning, as they prepared for their journey and waved goodbye and slipped the surly bonds of earth to touch the face of God.
As he had earlier in the day, the president underscored his determination for the U.S. to continue its space program after an investigation of what went wrong today.
The future doesn't belong to the faint-hearted. It belongs to the brave. The Challenger crew was pulling us into the future, and we'll continue to follow them.
On Capitol Hill, House Speaker O'Neill praised the patriotism of the crew.
We salute those who risked and gave their lives to serve our country at the last great frontiers.
Utah Senator Jake Garn, the first civilian to fly a shuttle mission.
Well, it's very difficult for me to talk about it because these were my friends. I don't know of any time that I have been more shocked or more moved than when my first wife was killed in an automobile accident. And so it's been very, very difficult for me this morning.
Former astronaut Senator John Glenn.
We had hoped to push this day back forever, but that was not to be, and we all, I guess, intuitively knew that. So it's a day we don't want to repeat, that's for sure.
Florida Congressman Bill Nelson just returned from a shuttle mission.
God bless and be with and keep in the palm of his hand our departed brothers and sisters, daring adventurers.
Sheila Cast, ABC News, Washington.
Many thousands of people have contributed to the space program over the years, including one who has just returned to our area after serving 5 years as the Chief of Security at the Kennedy Space Center. Gerald Pierce, shown here on the left, has returned to Appalachian after spending most of his life as a policeman and security officer in and around the Cape. Pierce told us tonight his impression of the explosion.
Well, from what I saw, it looked like an explosion
probably initiated, maybe an outside force, such as a problem with the SRB. Who knows, the icing problem they talked about earlier to pad. But it looked to me like the ET tank exploded and that the liquid oxygen and hydrogen come together. And it was such a mass, enormous explosion that I couldn't see how anybody could survive it. And what I saw, the debris, was probably pieces of the orbiter and pieces of the ET tank going into the ocean. I guess we'll, as NASA finds out more, we'll hear more of what exactly did happen.
Pierce says he knew astronauts Michael Smith and Judy Resnick personally and was deeply moved by today's tragedy.
My heart dropped, and of course, immediately I knew that I knew two of the people aboard. And of course, I knew a lot of the other astronauts very well. John Young, I got to see him at every launch, and we were at the shuttle landing facility together and drank coffee together. And, you know, I don't know, I had mixed emotions. It was a sorrowful event. I hated to see it because I'm very much interested in the space program, and I know this is going to halt the space program until all the problems are worked out, until they find out what happened. NASA is very meticulous in that they won't do anything until they find out what happened and are able to correct it. And it could mean a serious backstep, as far as I'm concerned, in the space program.
Pierce says he is a pilot himself and dreams of going up in the shuttle, but he says he would not go now until the cause of the disaster is discovered. A graduate of Mohawk High School and the State University of New York at Buffalo was aboard the ill-fated space shuttle. 41-year-old Gregory Jarvis, an engineer with Hughes Aircraft Company, was to conduct 6 days of orbital experiments in fluid dynamics to devise better ways to build satellites. His stepfather says Jarvis called his selection for the flight the ultimate. The tragedy of the Space Shuttle Challenger has given rise to many questions for which there are no immediate answers. Today, First News 34 contacted the Singer Link Flight Simulation Company here in the Binghamton area. Singer Link claims to be the world's leader in flight simulation equipment. The Binghamton plant did make the flight simulator for NASA's shuttle program, but refused to comment on the disaster. First News spoke with the Vice President of Corporate Relations, Thomas Elliott, at SingerLink's corporate headquarters in Stamford, Connecticut. We were told that SingerLink in Binghamton did make the simulators and that they were shipped to Houston to be maintained. Elliott stated that although that they were contacted by NASA and were not qualified to make further comments on the shuttle's explosion without NASA's approval. A Cornell University astronomy professor tonight said the manned space program is a public relations effort which exposes men to unnecessary risks. Professor Thomas Gold also said the government has spent money on the manned space programs at the expense of more sophisticated equipment to explore the solar system. In a PBS interview, Gold said the men should not be sent into space unless humans are absolutely needed. On the McNeil-Lehrer report, Gold said the shuttle program is a waste of money to put the satellites into orbit. The space agency has said the shuttle program represents an efficient means of getting satellites into orbit. Gold said to use men to take unmanned satellites into orbit, I personally think is crazy. And coming up next on First News, the city of Binghamton is trying to figure out how much the water emergency is going to cost. And we'll look back on the life of the first teacher to try to fly and to die on the space mission.
Well, no, I have. So that's fine. We're here with Jerry Pierce, former supervisor of security at the Kennedy Space Center. And Jerry, could you tell us how you learned of the events today?
Well, I was near a television monitor earlier today, and some friends of mine knew I had left the Space Center just a short time ago, and they yelled and said the shuttle or orbiter had just exploded, and I ran into television monitor and looked at it, and what I saw was debris falling. And of course, the replays from the news networks.
When you saw the explosion, did it ever come to mind that there's a possibility that these people could live?
When I saw the explosion and saw the debris falling, my first thought was no one could have lived through that massive explosion. What I saw, I recall that explosion.
Could you describe what forces are at work?
Well, the large ET tank, the ET tank, has liquid oxygen piping and hydrogen in it. The two solid rocket boosters have the impact of thousands of tons of TNT. And you have the 3 engines on the orbiter working, you have the 2 solid rocket boosters working, and you have all these hypergalls that if they're mixed under any kind of an uncontrolled situation, become very volatile, explosive. I've seen tests where they've taken 3 and 4 drops put together, and it's enough to blow a hole in the ground. So I can't imagine what thousands and thousands and thousands of gallons of this stuff coming together. The explosion just overwhelms.
Even with the explosive forces at work during liftoff, there were some rescue contingencies.
Yes, the NASA has 3 helicopters that are specifically set aside for security and rescue operations. Initially, one of the helicopters is used for security because of the large area. There's so many acres covered that are swamp that they patrol that continuously. At time of launch, the security unit backs off from the launch about 4 miles, and they observe the launch. If there's any type of emergency, such as the landing of the orbiter, or the orbiter has to be blown away from the ET tank and landed, then the helicopter lands, and they have all 3 helicopters leave the ground with people who can handle water emergencies and medical people, and with the litters to bring the astronauts immediately into the hospital for treatment. The 2 contingencies they have they're called the Mode 6, Mode 7 contingency. One is for on-site or on Kennedy Space Center emergency, and the other one is off Kennedy Space Center emergency. The one they use today would have been the Mode 7 or off-site emergency.
Some people have mentioned escape hatches. Now, escape hatches were not part of these latest shuttle missions.
No, they weren't. The original orbiter had 2 escape hatches on the top, where the seats would be going through the top, and the 2 astronauts inside could escape. They had automatic parachutes and everything on the chairs. After they had run the missions, they decided that one is that the astronauts probably wouldn't survive the ejection because they're into space so fast. And then they decided that also they could carry more astronauts, so the space was used to put in more chairs and, of course, more astronauts. Now, a small portion of the orbiter is cabin, and the rest of the orbiter is a bay for the satellites and stuff that's carried into space.
Working at the Kennedy Space Center, you got to know some astronauts.
Yes, you work with them every day, and of course, we control access to the astronauts prior to launch, the security people do. And I knew 2 of the astronauts personally who were aboard this mission, Smith and Resnick. I have autographed pictures at home from them.
What is the feeling at the launch site for launch? Everyone, these shuttle missions have been called automatic of late. What is the feeling at the launch?
Well, the people who work there, and I can say, speaking for myself, there's a lot of anxiety at launch time until you see the orbiter going out of sight, and you know that, and of course we're listening to privileged communication, which tells us that they're at a point where they can do an RTLS, return to landing site. And when we hear RTLS, we kind of breathe a sigh of relief, which means that they could bring the orbiter back to the landing site. And then the next thing that we listen for in the helicopter is that they have reached orbit and that RTLS contingency is no longer necessary.
I wanted to stay up and watch it. Look at the news site.
This was your whole gear, Mary?
Some of it. Pretty sophisticated stuff there. I don't know if that can get any good as far as talking about it. Down there, nobody understood it. That's the VAB building in the background.
VAB?
Vertical Summit building here in the background.
Oh, you've done it?
Oh, there's the VAB and the orbiter on the crawler track. We landed there with a helicopter to talk to that guy. We had a problem. We spotted somebody who was someone. In fact, one of the master doctors on there took that.
Okay, Jeff, that's good.
Now, they won't do anything until they find out what happened with reported water. A serious backstep as far as I'm concerned.
Okay, is there anything else you can add to today's events? What happens? As far as you know, who did your makeup for it?
Well, from what I saw,
I made up